Hi guys, this is the sixth, I think, in the series Open Up You Ancient Doors. And today we talk about how angelic forces from heaven can immobilize the enemy through our prayers. That's what we'll talk about. So if you look at 2 Kings 6:15 to 17, it's a story of Elisha, whose servant comes running to him saying, "Alas, we are surrounded by the chariots of the Syrians or the Arameans." And Elisha says, "There are more with us than those that are against us." And then he prays that the servant's eyes open, and the servant sees the chariots and the horsemen of Israel, which is basically a reference to the angelic hosts that God had sent. And then the enemy armies are struck blind, and Elisha triumphs over them. And so when you look at the Old Testament and the New Testament, you find that angels have the ability to forbid entry. They have the ability to battle and hold at bay evil angels. They release judgments. They are messengers, like in Luke chapter 2 verse 9. They are strengtheners, as in Daniel 10:18 and Luke 22:43. They can be warriors, and God can send overwhelming force that is angelic. In Revelations 12:7, you see that, and the angelic forces of God are no match for demonic angels. There is no contest. It looks like there's a contest, but they are no match. Revelations 12:7 talks about that, especially the message. Angels can be executioners, angels can be visitors, angels can be bodily guardians who protect you. Angels can search and rescue, as they did with Peter in Acts chapter 12 verse 7 to 9. And occasionally angels can even explain scriptures, like in Revelations 11:1 and Zechariah 6:4. All to say that they play such an important invisible part as we go about praying. They are ministering spirits that do God's bidding. In fact, in Deuteronomy 32 verse 8, we find that God saying, "Listen, I take care of Israel, but I also want you to know that nations have been placed under divine guardians." That's how it phrases it in some versions. I think NIV talks about that. Nations were allotted to divine guardians, as in placed under angelic forces, though God himself takes care of his people. All to say that while it is God who answers prayer, angels work behind the scene to manifest the answer by either neutralizing or subduing invisible demonic powers, invisible demonic intent, invisible demonic resistance. And you can read about that in the Old Testament and the New. In the book of Daniel, you find that mentioned quite often in Daniel chapter 10. And in Acts chapter 12, the people were praying for Peter, and Peter was going to be executed just in a couple of days. And that's when, in answer to prayer, an angel comes and frees Peter from prison, and then he turns up at the very home that they were praying for him. But the strange thing is, at no point during the New Testament do we see people praying to angels or praying for angelic intervention. They just pray to God, and God takes care of the rest. So what we need to do is train to stand, and stand as in push through in prayer, so that while we do that, angelic forces can pull down principalities of darkness in battle. And in the process, God's cause is advanced, and prayer becomes powerful, because we don't see it happening, but God takes care of it. So our prayer is to God, while angelic forces fight on our behalf. And so real prayer warriors fuel battles in the heavenlies, so that God's purposes are imposed, enforced, or executed on the earth. So mine is not to call for angelic help, because we don't see that in the New Testament. Mine is to stand and push through in prayer, knowing that there is a vast array of angelic forces that are battling and bringing through what God has asked us to pray. And that is a common portrayal in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. And so one of the things we'll do is pick an area in Vancouver that we can focus on and pray for the next 2 or 3 days. And as we pray, I believe that God will begin to send His host to bring to pass the cleansing, the re-establishing, the rescuing of people and their desolate heritages. You see in Daniel, for instance, that the moment Daniel started praying, there was an angelic battle between, I think it was Michael and the Prince of Persia and the Prince of Greece, which I'm convinced are evil angelic forces. And what happens when evil intent is thwarted is that the gospel penetrates and desolate heritages are restored. So this is something that happens in the invisible. We are, like, the strange thing is, Paul actually, without referring to it in great detail, says that our battle is against invisible spiritual forces and not against flesh and blood. And so God has His own solution to that, and He can send overwhelming force in answer to our prayers. So we need to pray to God. God will do the invisible work behind the scenes. And so just keep that in mind. Before I pick an area in Vancouver that we can pray for, I just want to remind you that as we face this pandemic, we must remember that the plagues in Egypt, though it was attributed to God, when you read Psalm 78 verse 49 from, say, the King James Version, which puts it very plainly, it says that God cast upon them the fierceness of His anger, wrath, and indignation and trouble by sending evil angels among them, which points to the fact that God allowed a company of evil or destroying angels to ravage the land. I'm not saying that's what's happening with the pandemic. I'm saying plagues are caused sometimes by invisible demonic forces that we don't see. But unfortunately, because everything is attributed to God, especially during the Old Testament times and even today, what do we call a disaster? An act of God. And it is so not true. Look at the book of Job and you will see evil angels at work behind raids, behind whirlwinds, behind hail, behind evil. I mean, Job chapter 1 and 2 so describe the evil intent of demonic forces behind natural disasters. And so even as we talk about this plague, I want you to keep Psalm 78 verse 49 in the back of your mind. That God was aware of it, but it was a band of evil, marauding evil angels, a company of destroying angels that went around causing these plagues. And so what I want us to do is just pray to God for one area in Vancouver. And so I'm going to pick the downtown east side, which has about 3,000 to 5,000 residents. And it's a block, a few blocks that perhaps has seen much desolation. There are chronically ill people, there are mentally ill people, there are people that have been disabled by addictions, there are extreme behaviors, there's no permanent housing, there's regular police contact, fentanyl and other drugs are common, and you hear stories of how that area at present is really being ravaged by the by the fallout of the pandemic, both in terms of COVID and in terms of the lack of facilities, which is making it a hellhole of sorts. And so can you begin to pray for that area? Go look at a map, find that area and begin to pray to God that, Father, would you restore this desolate heritage? Would you give me a lament in my heart for these that are made, these people, wonderful image bearers of God. And as you pray, trust that God will cause an angelic army to begin to blow through that area, causing changes that may not be visible to us, but in the invisible, things will begin to happen. So that's what I wanted to ask you to do for the next couple of days. Yeah? Bless you.